What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. I'm AJ Malillo,
And I'm Steven Rombolo.
and you are listening to Jersey First TV and you can subscribe to Jersey First TV on YouTube, hit that little notification bell, get all of your Jersey First content, Bridging the Gap, The Nader Narrative, Real Talk with Fernando. You can also check us out on demand on OnNJ, our newest streaming service. We're glad to be part of on NJ and a partnership over there. And so you could get us anywhere. And you can also check us out on jerseyfirst.org. You could sign the pledge. You can sign up for the newsletter, keeping all things Jersey, especially education, which is going to be the big topic of today's show. But before we get into that, Steven, how was your week?
It was another week,
That's what they keep coming,
Yeah. They don't stop. So
Sure.
I will say, Rutgers did finally, I guess, not hear any of my calls and pleas, and got back some less than satisfying news out of Rutgers Law School. Just want to take a moment and let them know that they fumbled a tremendous bag, because I believe that there's a great talent sitting behind this microphone that wanted nothing but the opportunity to earn my next greatest, latest, and last degree from a New Jersey public school. And Rutgers just apparently doesn't seem fit to be the place to carry on that vision. So nevertheless, we persist.
That's right.
Head high, and someday they'll tell a story about this.
Sure, I agree. Look, we're going to law school still, right, Steve? And that's all that matters. That's what I told you when we found out about the news. And we're going to go to law school. We're going to crush it. That's because that's what we do.
You're right. That is what we do.
It's what we do.
Aside from that very dissatisfying news, it's been a decent week now. I'm kind of in absolute scramble mode. I've got to get a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of moving pieces.
Quite literally.
Yeah, literally moving, moving very far. There's like moving pieces, moving parts that are all moving together in disarray. And it's my job to kind of like, you ever see those games that they play with MMA fighters where it's like they have a bunch of pad like lights in front of them, and like when one blinks, they gotta like hit it.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to be doing that for the next like 4 to 6 weeks of my life, where it's like, this came up, got to get it. But while you're over here, there's a light going off down here, and you're like trying to do this, but there's one behind you too. So I think I'm going to be in scramble mode for a little bit, trying to get the pieces all put together. But
it's the storm before the calm, which then turns into another storm, right? It's the storm before the calm before the storm.
Yeah, that's basically where
that's
we're
what
at.
You're in right now.
We're weathering. We're weathering hard.
That's all you can do.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. You'll weather the storm. You'll get it. It'll all work out at the end. You'll get down there. You'll be in sunny Florida, and like it'll be wonderful. Lovely weather. Yeah. Sit by a pool for a little bit. You'll feel calm. You'll be like, all right, I'm here. I'm within. And then school start, and you'll be like, oh.
Yeah.
No longer.
I signed up to do this. This is what I asked for. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. So like I said, big things on the horizon. A lot of things that I got to get done. So it's going to be time consuming. It's going to be fluster period. Not exactly the way that I anticipated summer progressing for me, but nevertheless, this is, I know we had said it last week, but this is something I really value about the show and our dynamic here is it's honesty. And I've had so many conversations with people that I've met at work, customers, coworkers who are in these similar positions where they're young, ambitious, professionally driven, trying to get their life together. And I hope that these conversations between us can serve some sort of utility to people who are in the same situation. I know I played an episode of our show the other day for my boss, and he's like, man, you guys look so old when you're on the internet. But as old as we may look, we're 24 years old. Like, we're relatively young guys who are out doing a lot of things. And I want this kind of casual conversation to serve the purpose of saying, like, it's totally okay to not have your ducks in a row at the age of 24 and still be shooting for the stars. Like you're almost never going to have your ducks in a row is what I'm learning. And even when you think they're in a row, they really aren't. It's just an optical illusion. So anybody that's out there that might be facing a similar situation, there's chaos in your life, you were trying to control the controllables, and even those feel uncontrollable. Just keep your head down, have great people around you, and lean on them when you can and when you need them the most, and just kind of have rock steady support all the way around, and people that are going to pick you up, remind you of your vision, remind you of your goals, and push you as close as they can to that finish line, because you're all running the same race together.
No, absolutely. And I think that just like to kind of finalize this and put a button on it, so to speak. Like, you can only control what you can control, right? You can't control what's going on. You can't control what other people do. You can't control the things that happen to you. The only thing you can control is how you respond to the things happening to you. So, like you said, put your head down and get to work on those things. It's just like, yeah, okay, you didn't hear what you want to hear from Rutgers, and now you have like 4 weeks to pretty much get everything ready to move down to Florida. But what can you do to control that? You could just do what you have to do. Get a place to stay, figure it out, and go. And get ready and put yourself in a position to succeed. Because at the end of the day, no matter what happens, you're never going to be able to make something happen for your future. Like, you can put yourself in a position. It's almost like think about it in baseball, right? There's a ground ball that's hit, right, to a shortstop, say. The shortstop can run to where he thinks the ball is going to go. And a lot of times the ball's going to go there. He's going to make the play. He's going to throw the guy out at first. But sometimes maybe a rock gets in the way and the ball takes a weird hop. And then what are you going to do? You just have to adapt and change to that situation and either try and make a spectacular play if you can, or you let the ball go through. The guy gets a base hit. Like, you did what you could do. You went to where the ball should have gone, but something happened. Something went awry. And that's going to happen. And that's life, right? Sometimes it takes a weird hop. You just got to realize that weird hop and adjust to it and get into the right position to make that adjustment.
Well, listen, if that's the analogy we're playing, I'm trying to be Derek Jeter, man. That's
Sure.
it.
Yeah, I mean, look, they say that Derek Jeter is one of the best offensive shortstops in the history of the game, but some people try and tell me he wasn't a good defensive shortstop. And do you know what I say to that? I say, watch that man dive into the stands and break his face and make a catch and tell me that man isn't a good defensive shortstop, because he's going to make the play. He's going to make the play.
But that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to make the play.
Like I said, some people might say, oh, Steven, he's a real good talker, but I don't know if he can do this. I say, watch that man dive into the stand and break his face to do it. You know what I'm trying to say here? Like, that's the kind of guy you are. You're going to run through the brick wall.
You're right. Face broken or not.
That's right. You're going to make the play. You're going to come up with the ball.
You're right. 100%.
All right. I'll talk a little bit about my week. It was same old. Rocking with this internship, working weekends. Nothing crazy going on. Mom's up visiting, so that's nice. Hanging out with mom a little bit, talking to mom, being home, and mom's at dinner. That's always nice. You can't beat that.
Nothing like it.
So, other than that, nothing crazy going on over here.
All is well in Melillo
That's
world.
Right. We're just rocking and rolling. It's all we can do.
That's it. You know what you are? You're sitting there, you're waiting for the next hop. So
That's right.
too then will have the opportunity to dive in the stands, break your face, and come up with the ball.
I'm actually in the calm right now. The storm is coming.
Yeah.
2L year starts in a month about. Or not a month, like a month and almost a month and a half. So
crazy.
We're rocking.
Absolutely crazy.
But look, speaking of school and speaking of craziness, it was Supreme Court week. They put out a bunch of decisions this week, and I would say that none were bigger than a landmark case that they decided that came out today that we are recording this, so Thursday, which was the case. Let me get the actual name of this case.
Oh,
I don't
I
have it
got
in
it
front
if
of
you
me.
need it.
Students for Fair Admissions, Inc. versus Presidents and Fellows of Harvard College. So basically, this case was dealing with affirmative action on college campuses, mainly looking at Harvard University's admissions and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's admission process. Um, in the first couple paragraphs of the decision, when you look at it, the first thing you see when you look at a Supreme Court decision is the syllabus. So that's pretty much like the head note, what's going on in the case, and they kind of give you, it's like the spark notes in a way, of a case. But they write, at Harvard, each application for admissions is initially screened by a first reader who assigns a numerical score in each of 6 categories: academic, extracurricular, athletic, school support, personal, and overall. For the overall category, a composite of 5 other ratings, a first reader can and does consider the applicant's race. Harvard's admissions subcommittees then review all applications from the particular geographic area. These regional subcommittees make recommendations to the full admissions committee, and they take an applicant's race into account. When the 40-member full admissions committee begins its deliberations, it discusses the relative breakdown of applicants by race. The goal of the process, according to Harvard's director of admissions, is to ensure that there is no, quote, dramatic drop off in minority admissions from the prior class. An applicant receiving a majority of the full committee's votes is tentatively accepted for admission. At the end of this process, the racial composition of the tentative applicant pool is disclosed to the committee. The last stage of Harvard's admissions process, called the LOPE, winnows the list of tentatively admitted students to arrive at the final class. Applicants that Harvard considered cutting at this stage are placed on the LOPE list, or LOP list, which contains only 4 pieces of information: legacy status, recruited athlete status, financial aid eligibility, and race. In the Harvard admissions process, race is a determinative tip for a significant percentage of all admitted African Americans and Hispanic applicants. UNC has a similar admissions process. And then it goes into talks about UNC's admissions process. So basically, this case is about race-based admissions. This is about affirmative action. And Stephen, I know that you had it pulled up, and I don't have it off the top of my head. Affirmative action was decided by the court in what year that it really became the doctrine of the court, saying this was allowed?
See, that's a great one, because I didn't have that one pulled up.
Well, it was a Sandra Day O'Connor decision.
Yeah.
And
it was hold on. So it at least in terms of founding affirmative action, I don't have that case, but the case that this directly overturns is a 2003 case.
Okay, but it was founded much earlier. I'm going to get that for you. But basically, this case
1978, Regents of the University of California versus, I'm going to call it Bakke, is how I imagine you pronounce that, Bakke.
Right. So in that case, basically what they said was that these race-based admissions were allowable because it was just coming on the heels of the Civil Rights Act. And they were trying to up the levels of minorities in these colleges because they wanted to give an equal representation of them in higher education, or a more equitable representation of them in higher education, so that they would be better off getting these degrees and earning this chance. So it was a leg up for the minorities that were just discriminated against for 150 years almost since the nation's founding. Now, in that 2003 Sandra Day O'Connor case, where she talks about affirmative action, she says, and Stephen, you have the full quote. She says basically affirmative action should have lasted for 25 years. And that was kind of the point in that initial case. It was like, this is what we need right now. It isn't always going to be needed. We want to get people on an equal playing field, that everybody, like to make race less of an issue, in the future.
Yes. You mind if I read this real quick?
Sure. Yeah.
So for the context, I'm pulling this from SCOTUS blog. They had wrote this today. It says, quote, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor reaffirmed that, quote, student body diversity is a compelling state interest that can justify the use of race in university admissions, end quote. But she warned that race-conscious admissions policies should not last forever. In 25 years, she suggested, quote, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary to further the interest in diversity, end quote. So I think the important thing there, and I don't want to totally get your stream of consciousness off, is talking about the language that she used, because it's to promote diversity. So I know that in the discussion that we've been hearing today, since this decision came out that is overturning affirmative action, it's been about equity and equality and equal opportunity. When this was, basically reaffirmed in 2003 for, the 40-ish, 30-ish years that it has been in practice prior to that, it was about promoting a state interest in diversity. So I don't know if we want to unpack that a little bit and talk about what a state interest in diversity in university admissions looks like and why that's important. And then maybe, theorize and talk a little bit about why Sandra Day O'Connor, who is a pioneer and a champion of affirmative action, believed that it was only a temporary fix, a temporary interest of the state to protect.
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about why diversity is a state interest in this case, it goes to something that Michelle Obama said in the wake of this decision, right? It's to allow on college campuses more voices to be heard, because fundamentally a college campus should be a place where ideas are spoken about and minds are changed and preconceived notions are challenged. And so people coming from a bunch of different backgrounds and diversity in thought from how they are raised and how they are brought up is an important part of this process and it's clearly a state interest, because you want people to have a larger world view, being able to understand why other people think differently than they do. We live in a country of a free society, of a free people, that people are going to think differently. And we want to basically, on a college campus, make as much of that heard as possible. And the state has an interest in making that heard so that we have a more tolerant society, right? I think that would basically be the argument as to the interest there and the discrimination. Now, I think the argument I'm saying this is a temporary thing is saying eventually we are going to get to a point that all voices are heard and understood. And I think what's important to note about that is that today, in the world that we live, there is no better time in the history of human civilization to make that abundantly clear, that we do live in a time that every voice is heard and can be heard, because everybody has social media, everybody has instant access to phones, anybody can get on TikTok and go viral, anybody can get on Twitter and go viral. Voices are heard abundantly, and the college, which historically was the place to dispel your notions and ideas, is no longer the stomping grounds that happens on a regular basis. So that diversity goal is already being met elsewhere.
So I think that you hit the nail on the head for that, for me, because when I was reading that, and I think now more than ever, like when you're discussing court cases and legal issues, right, like language matters, and it is about diversity. And I think we can touch on too the decision that came out today and how the court views it affecting military higher education admissions, because it's a bit of a different circumstance. But I would agree with you. The notion of what a university is and what a university should be is this sort of like exchange place for ideas and experiences and opportunities. And to your point, there are so many people, and it was funny when we were talking before the show, you referred to a reporter as a blue check Twitter reporter, and there's people, I know that came off on your end as this kind of like sarcastic comment about the credibility of this individual. But there are people who believe that if you have a blue check or if you have some sort of verification on the internet, that you have an opinion that is worth trusting, that is worth digging into, finding more about. And I think we could go down a whole rabbit hole about why maybe there is too much, dare I say, diversity in terms of like the content of the opinions that you're able to hear and the way that they are amplified by strict platforms and whatnot. But those goals, I agree, are being met elsewhere. Anybody can get on YouTube and watch a lecture from any university that you want to go to. You know what I mean? Like, there's information that is out there that is accessible from all different types of people, from all different walks of life, experiences, genders, sexuality, races, religions, backgrounds. Like, it is so accessible. And so the notion that there needs to be some sort of legislative mandate, or I'll say, judicial mandate, that higher education institutions need to follow certain quotas that are based on race is a very outdated concept. And I think that this decision from the court today is affirming, and I'm actually quite enthused by this. I'm a big government guy myself. I fancy a larger government. But we've talked about this so many times throughout the history of our show. You're talking half a decade at this point, that it seems like a common trend in the government is we start programs, we start initiatives, and they never end. And they just go and go and go and go. And I know Social Security is one of those big ones that when it was started, FDR did not anticipate Social Security being this thing that carries on for 100 years. And that's why there's this push from certain people, although they may deny it on the right, to end Social Security. Affirmative action, sort of falls along that same line, where it was created. It has this, very specific utility that is a temporary thing for the timeline of American history. And it's just continued to go and go and go and go. And I think that the challenges brought up by the Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated in both of these cases are very valid. And I think that they urge the court to do something that should have been done, which is put an end to a program that was designed and thoughtfully crafted to be temporary.
Well, I would agree. And I think that when you're looking at like Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote the decision in this case, he talks a lot about how he writes in talking about the dissent, basically how the dissent is arguing, and Justice Jackson wrote the main dissent in this case. He writes, the principal dissent wrenches our case law from its context, going to lengths to ignore the parts of the law it does not like. The serious reservations that Bake, Grutter, and Fisher, which are the cases that matter, had about racial preferences go unrecognized. Roberts began, the unambiguous requirement of the Equal Protection Clause, the most rigid, searching scrutiny it entails, go without note. And the repeated demands that race-based admissions programs must end go overlooked, contorted worse still into the demand that such programs never stop. Most troubling of all is what the dissent must make these omissions to defend: a judiciary that picks winners and losers based on the color of their skin. While the dissent would certainly not promote university programs that discriminate against Black and Latino applicants, it is perfectly willing to let programs here continue. In its view, the court is supposed to tell state actors then when they have picked the right races to benefit, separate but equal is inherently unequal. It depends, says the dissent. So basically what Roberts is saying there is what the dissent wants, what the side for affirmative action wants in this case, is to say discrimination is okay based off of race if we are picking that Black and Latino people are the winners. And they're ignoring the parts in these cases, in this case law, that this is supposed to end at some point when it is a more equal society. And I think Justice Thomas goes into this talking about how there's always going to be discrimination in our society, but inherently the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and the federal government can't be the place where that discrimination happens, right? Individuals are going to discriminate, and it's an unfortunate part of human beings. But the government can't. You can't have separate but equal, like they say. That's one of the most awful things that the court had. It was in the Dred Scott decision, the separate but equal doctrine. So the point is that there is a side in the country that agrees with the dissent in this case. The side that you're probably seeing a lot on social media talk about how this is like this terrible and racist decision that is fighting for things like separate graduations for Black students from the rest of the class, and they're pretending like they're champions. You have the reporter that I noted that said today's Supreme Court decision is a direct attack on Black people. No Black person will be able to succeed in a merit-based system, which is exactly why affirmative action-based programs were needed. You have the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, saying they want to whitewash our nation's history. They want to bring America back to the era of book bans and segregated campuses. We cannot let them, right? So this is your argument, and you're like, oh, the Supreme Court's trying to make racial discrimination a thing in college admissions. But if you read these decisions, it's the complete opposite. No, they want to make it merit-based. So if your argument is that a merit-based system is inherently going to be a racist system, what you're arguing is that Black and Latin people can't succeed based off of their merits, based off of their accomplishments, based off of the content of their character over the race of their skin, right? And I think the argument that they're trying to say is that there is a disparity between wealthy people and poor people. But they're saying, and some people are saying that directly, but they're tying it into race by saying Latinos and Black people are poor, and that's wrong. And because they're poor, they can't succeed. And in fact, they don't really hide it all that much because, our president said once, I think that poor kids are just as good as white kids, it's these types of comments that are perpetuating this racial discrimination. You can't get out of this because of the color of your skin. Meanwhile, if you said, no, okay, this is what the court's decision was say. We are going by merit-based, meaning those that get the best grades, those that are the best athletes, those that are the best in this applicant pool is going to get it, regardless of this color of their skin. That is a fair system. Now, you can turn around and say some kids have advantages. Some kids can afford getting an SAT tutor and go to a better high school, that there's more resources available to them. Yeah, that's true. So maybe we can bring in wealth issues into this. But that doesn't mean that race is the door to get in, if that makes sense. They are trying to fix wealth inequalities through the door of race, which seems inherently racist, by saying Black and Latino people are poor people. So that's the avenue that you have to go through to help the poor people. And it just seems ridiculous. And the soft bigotry of low expectations to me, which is to quote Justice Thomas. You're on mute, Steve, by the way.
Thank you. So there's a few things. I think the first time that you read that quote, and I'll ask you to read it again from the reporter on Twitter. Can you just read it one more time?
Yeah. She said, it's Erica Marsh, by the way. Today's Supreme Court decision is a direct attack on Black people. No Black person will be able to succeed in a merit-based system, which is exactly why affirmative action-based programs were needed. Today's decision is a travesty.
Okay. So the first time that I heard that, and that is not the first take that I have heard like that, I wish that we could just click her in here right now and I could look her in the face and ask her why she thought it would be an appropriate thing to get on her platform with however many followers that she has and proclaim that black people will not be able to succeed in a merit-based system, because that is a ridiculous racially charged statement to make that is insanely, imposingly oppressive on black Americans. I don't know who this woman is or who anybody believes what this woman says are to proclaim that black people are unable to be successful in merit-based systems. Like, that is my issue with the way that this case is being discussed right now, is that it's neglecting to acknowledge the heart of the case and the intricacies of this decision and the admissions processes and what goes on in all of these things. And instead it gets watered down to black people can't succeed in a merit-based system. That, in my opinion, coming out of anybody else's mouth, is an extraordinarily hateful statement. It is an extraordinarily, like I said, imposing and offensive statement. And that sounds tremendously regressive, to make it seem as if this population is incapable. I know Kanye West got in a little bit of trouble when he said something similar, but it's like, are you attempting to hold yourself back? Are you just proclaiming this?
Well, I should note this is a white woman.
Okay, even crazier that there is probably supportive comments and people who are agreeing with her when she says an insanely hateful thing, when the decision actually promotes more equitable access, ends a program that was designed not to last forever, and completely acknowledges that there was a utility for this program. There is data that suggests that it accomplished the mission that it was created to accomplish, and it is time to end it for various reasons. And let's not forget that as much of this discussion that's been coming out from these leaders is about black and Hispanic people, the case with Harvard was dealing with Asian American students,
right, who are being actively discriminated against because of their race. Who they were saying, we can't accept as many Asian students as we should based off of their merits, because that would make them overrepresented in our institution.
Yes, based on the standards that are set by affirmative action. Right. So how this story has been twisted and manipulated and put into the public sphere as some assault on black and Hispanic Americans is beyond me, because we are dealing with a case that is a win for another minority in America, which is the Asian Americans who won the case against Harvard. And so that, to me, should be worthy of some sort of notoriety, some sort of, hey, we did the right thing. We did right by these people. And we acknowledged a flaw in a system that is not designed to be here and exist as long as it has, because this is exactly what would happen.
Right. And I think that the reason we're talking about, the effect that it has, the supposed effect, I should say, that it has on the black and Hispanic population is because that's what our leaders, our cultural leaders, are making it about. And I think Michelle Obama's statement on this, I think, is something that's important to note. She says, "Back in college, I was one of the few black students on my campus, and I was proud of getting into such a respected school. I knew I'd worked hard for it, but still, I sometimes wondered if people thought I got there because of affirmative action. It was a shadow that students like me couldn't shake, whether those doubts came from the outside or the inside of our own minds." That's exactly the problem with affirmative action, right? Even when it was needed and necessary and of the best intention, which I think it is of the best intention. Okay. That's the problem with it. It makes people feel like they couldn't have done it on their own. That the only reason they got there was because they happened to be born a certain skin tone, a certain race. That's wrong. That's a wrong thing to make people feel. You can do it on your own. That's the whole Obama 2008 campaign, right? Yes, we can. You can do it. It doesn't matter what color you are. That's the message that her and her husband ran on just not even 20 years ago. We can do this because we're Americans, because we can achieve anything in this country. She goes on. But the fact is this: I belonged. And semester after semester, decade after decade, for more than half a century, countless students like me showed they belonged too. It wasn't just the kids of color who benefited either. Every student who heard the perspective they might not have encountered, who had an assumption challenged, who had their minds and their hearts opened, gained a lot as well. It wasn't perfect, but there's no doubt that it helped offer new ladders of opportunity for those who throughout our history have too often been denied a chance to show how fast they can climb. I don't disagree necessarily with anything that she said there. I don't disagree with any of it. That's exactly why it was needed. Absolutely agree. And fine. She goes on. Of course, students on my campus and countless others across the country were and continue to be granted special considerations for admissions. Some have parents who graduated from the same school, talking about heritage and legacy applicants. I think something, Stephen, that I can look at you and most people would agree maybe shouldn't be considered.
100% agree.
And I think that's what Michelle Obama is trying to get at. This is an unfair advantage. They were privileged, their dad went to Harvard, so they get to go to Harvard. No, I think that should be done away with. That seems unfair. Okay, so let's move on to the next point. We agree there, Michelle. Others have families who can afford coaches to help them run faster or hit a ball harder. Others go to high schools with lavish resources for tutors and extensive standardized test prep to help them score higher on college entrance exams. Yeah. Some people have more privilege. Maybe we should do some school choice for that. Maybe that'll help that. Maybe zip code shouldn't decide where you go to school. We're on the same page, Michelle. I like where your head's at. We're going through this the same way. We're here together, okay? But that's not what she's getting at, obviously. But we don't usually question if those students belong. No, we don't. You're right. So often we just accept that money, power, privilege are perfectly justifiable forms of affirmative action. They aren't forms of affirmative action. They aren't forms of affirmative action because they are not openly on the books as the legal requirements to get into a school. I can agree with you that things should be more fair. Maybe we should make some sort of thing where if you are coming from a low income area, you get a preferential treatment for admissions, and not preferential in some obscure way, but something like, okay, they went to a high school that's historically in a bad area, underfunded, lesser resources, and they were still able to, get a good grade, get a good SAT score, and get good grades, even if they're not great. And they write a personal statement talking about all of the struggles that they had growing up poor. Yes, there's nothing to do with race there. There doesn't have to be anything to do with race there, because guess what? White people, black people, Spanish people, Asian people, they're all like, there are segments of all of those populations poor. So, like, I don't know what to tell you. You're right. Poverty we should be helping people that are impoverished. That has nothing to do with race. She says, so today my heart breaks for any young person out there who's wondering what their future holds and what kind of chances that will be open to them. And while I know the strength and grit that lies inside kids who have always had to sweat a little more to climb the same ladders, I hope and pray that the rest of us are willing to sweat a little too. Today is a reminder that we've got to do the work, not just enact policies that reflect our values of equity and fairness, but to truly make those values real in all of our schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. And then she lists some organizations. And I think what's so mind-boggling about that statement is how much of it that I don't disagree with, but how the conclusion of those premises, I think, is so, pardon my French, but so ass backwards. It's like mind-boggling. Like I don't even know how she gets to the conclusion she got to. because she talks about how, like, all of the bad things that affirmative action did. It made her feel like she didn't belong. She
Yeah.
did belong. I think she's a brilliant woman. She clearly belonged. Like, what?
I wish that I could attempt to square these issues with you, but like you had said before, I think that after going through that line by line, point by point, it's hard not to reach a similar conclusion. And I think it's perplexing. And I think it echoes a lot of the same sentiments that we have heard from these same people, like that we've mentioned. Is you say things that clearly talk about, you clearly mention why this is a problem, why this is an issue. You allude to some sort of functional discrimination that comes out as a result of the existence of affirmative action, yet you end up completely on the other side at the end of whatever that statement that you're giving is. You connect the dots and you miss the last one and you don't get the big picture.
Yeah,
That's
look,
what it feels like.
I'm gonna say it this way. If the NFL's hiring practices were forced to be race equitable, the NFL would be a bad product. If the NBA was forced to be race equitable, the NBA would have a bad product. Colleges are forced through affirmative action to meet certain requirements based off of race instead of merit. And that's why our universities are suffering. It has nothing to do with the students themselves. It has to do with the fact that we aren't picking the best student applicants. And that, in my mind, I think the best student applicants come from all over the place. I think that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Black and Hispanic students that can get that deserve to get into the upper echelons of our higher education because they are smart enough, because they work hard enough, because they've done everything that they needed to succeed. And I think the same about Asian Americans, and I think the same about white Americans, and I think the same about literally anybody. Because if you are willing to put in the work, you deserve to reap the benefits of your merits. Okay? Nobody is calling for racial, hiring practices in certain areas because we all objectively know that if only, a certain percentage of these merit-based systems that we see in effect, which the easiest one is sports, you would see a worser product. What makes you think it's any different in something like higher education? These forced quotas. I want every American to succeed and have the ability to succeed. But the opportunity, the equality and opportunity is how you achieve that. Everybody has the same chance to succeed. That doesn't mean equality in outcome, which is what affirmative action is seeking. And that's not how you get there. You don't get to a more equal society through making people feel like Michelle Obama felt in the beginning of her message. The only reason I'm here is because they needed more people that look like her. No, the reason you're there is because you worked your ass off and you deserve it.
I don't disagree. Do you mind if I pivot?
You can pivot. You can pivot all you want.
Okay, because I want to get your take on this. Now, we spoke a lot about the decision, and I had mentioned earlier that there was one notable exemption to the affirmative action policies, which is military officer schools. I want to read a little bit from the Military Times about this, and then I want to talk briefly about something that we haven't spoke much about, which is some of the dissenting opinions, and just have a conversation and see if we can maybe reach some sort of middle ground on this point that I'll mention here. So in the decision that came out today, they had basically said that, administrative affirmative action is done for everybody. And Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that no military academy is party to these cases. However, none of the courts below address the propriety of race-based admission systems in that context. So he's like, this doesn't apply to military universities. Nobody's really asked that question. We're not going to address it. If it comes up, maybe we'll talk about it. So what I think is interesting is when this case was, making its rounds, going through arguments, and all the briefs and everything were coming in, there was 35 top military leaders, 4 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marine generals, Navy admirals, tons of high-level people who had filed a friend of the court brief arguing that affirmative action was necessary for national security. The court, took a fancy to this, and they rested a lot of their opinion in this case on that assertion that having affirmative action policies in place for military academies does serve some sort of national security interest. They argue that it, helps breed this sort of morale, and that there's diversity, and it makes, officers essentially are still, officer schools are suffering from the same fate that universities were before, where a lot of the students look the same, come from the same background. And so they argue that for diversity in the military, diversity in leadership, these optical roles that you need people that look like you in positions of power, this and that, it's still necessary for the military, and that is superimposed on a national security interest. Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissenting opinion, basically attacks the concurring opinions and says, quote, "To the extent that the court suggests national security interests are distinct, those interests cannot explain the court's narrow exemption, as national security interests are also implicated at civilian universities." So she's basically saying, if it's a national security interest and we're talking about, admissions to universities, it's all universities. Why does it only apply to the military? I'm curious if you think that there's any credibility to that claim, and how far does national security go when you're talking about academia at that level?
I agree with Sotomayor. I don't see how you square those two. I think it's a bit of a cop-out, because I guess the argument is that affirmative action in government hiring is still accepted, and it's still a part of, the practices that our government has, and this is separate because it's dealing with public universities and private universities, for that matter. And so it's like they're making them two separate arguments, but I don't see them being two separate arguments. I agree with Sotomayor. We should just get rid of all of it, and the military should pick the best people to be the leaders of their units. And quite frankly, if all of the people that they felt were the best people were people of color, then good on them. Yeah, people of color should also be, obviously should be members of our upper echelon in our military and our officers. Yes. I don't see the need for it to be directly required, because again, it leads to, it leads to somebody saying, why is this person my officer? Is the only reason this person is my officer is because they happen to be Black or Hispanic? I don't want that question to be asked. That question shouldn't be asked. That person's your officer because they deserve the position they got. So don't let that question be asked. I don't understand why that is such a problem.
And I think, interestingly, worth noting that there was a group who also submitted a friend of the court brief in this same case. It was 600 veterans, 20 of them Medal of Honor recipients, who argued just that point that you made. So there's division in the military about this issue as it pertains to officer schools as well. And clearly there are far more numbers. Although I think there's an irony in the disparity of the people that wrote the briefs, the people who were in the positions of power are like, no, keep it. We need to keep it. And the people who are just the veterans who are putting in the work, 21 Medal of Honor recipients.
You mean the people that have to take the orders from these people are saying, I want the best people for the job. And the people that are in the job are saying, no, it shouldn't just be the best people for the job.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Interesting.
So I say all of this because I think it brings out like the crux of this case and what we've been getting at, which is that there is this disparity very clearly in people that believe affirmative action is still utilitarian, there's still a utility to it, and people who believe that its time has expired. And you look at the positions that the people who are speaking poorly of this case, the positions that they are in as they're speaking about this, and there is a tremendous amount of irony when you look at the people who are in favor of this case and the positions that they are speaking from. And I think that goes to show exactly why this decision needed to happen the way that it did. There is no shortcut around it. I think affirmative action had its time has come, and the court made a really, I'll say the court was bold in issuing this decision. They're not, strangers to controversy. They're not strangers to protest or anger or resentment coming, down the pipe out of one of their decisions. But I think that tackling something as contentious as this, and even when these cases were brought up in the Supreme Court and they were argued it was contentious, doing the right thing gives me a lot of faith in the court that we have now. Whether or not I agree with all their decisions is beyond the point. But the fact that they make these really tough decisions about these really hard and important topics that start a conversation, I could only hope that every conversation about this case, begins and ends with the thoughtful consideration of any conversation that you and I would have, like we just had about it. Because I hate that the conversation is exactly what we were talking about before. People who are self-victimizing, people who are imposing a victim mentality on classes of people, on races of people that they are not even a part of. That is a problem that we need to address. And this case, on the contrary, is trying to remove discrimination. Justice John Roberts, and I think this is so important to note, wrote in this opinion, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. Period. Acknowledging.
It sounds an awful lot like a Morgan Freeman quote. You want race to stop being an issue, stop talking about race. It sounds an awful lot like Martin Luther King Jr. quotes. You should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Like, Stephen, I'll let you get the last word, but this is my final point. I don't care, fundamentally, the color of somebody's skin. I don't care. I care about their background. I care about their experience. I do. I care about their perception of the world. I care about those things. I care about how much work and effort they put into bettering themselves and the people around them. I care about the merits that make somebody a good applicant for a job or a student or whatever else. I care about them as individuals. Race, color of skin, pigmentation, where your genealogy happens to come from, is the least important part of you. It's all of the other things that matter more. And that's not to say that you facing discrimination and racism and out, bigotry against you is something that should be ignored. It's not. It's something that should be addressed and spoken about and known and attempt all we can to stop. It really, I have a hard time seeing how discriminating other people is helping discrimination at all. And I have a hard time seeing how making an argument that certain minorities, I'll say certain classes of minorities, making this argument that they can't succeed based off of their merits is mind-boggling to me. And that's the last thing I have to say, and I'll let you get the last word, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So I think, similar to what AJ said, if we want to cultivate a academic community that is making tremendous leaps and contributions to whatever field of study it is, you need to have the most qualified people in the most important positions to bring the best out of the people that are there to learn, converse, share ideas, and have their ideas challenged. And this echoes what the court said today, and I really think that they hit the nail on the head. An applicant to any school can talk about, how the color of their skin affects their important worldview, the challenges that they've had coming up, the hurdles that they've had to overcome. But for that fact, for the color of your skin, for your race, your genealogy, as you would put it, to be the determining factor is wrong. For it to serve as a consideration for the totality of your experiences as an individual, including things like your extracurriculars, your merits, your test scores, your involvement, your recommendations, like all the whole package. I think it serves as an important point of consideration for what makes you an individual and how the individual has overcame, how you have, progressed and grown and developed into your own, but for it to be the sole consideration, for it to be a tipping point, for it to be a deciding factor, as it was, and it was proven to have been in these schools at UNC and Harvard, is wrong. 110% is wrong, because favoring a race over another race, regardless of which they are, is discrimination. Point blank, period. You can insert X and you can insert Y. It is discrimination. And so what the court did today was they ended institutional discrimination. And that is something that is worth celebrating.
I agree. And I said I wouldn't have any more words. So with that, this has been another episode of Bridging the Gap on Jersey First TV and on NJ. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And for Jersey First, I'm AJ Malillo.
I'm Stephen Rimbolo.
And we hope you have a wonderful week. Talk to you later, everybody.